So I come from Katlehong, that's where I was born. I come from a very Christian background. I've got a younger sister. I was raised by a single parent, a mother, and I'm surrounded by women on a day to day. I'm a creative, and again, it's hard to define myself outside of my practice. Growing up in Katlehong, I don't know what to compare it to. I think because a large part of my childhood, I think, was formulated by those years. A large part of how I think, my sort of survival instinct as well. I think is also because of that environment.
Survival instinct.
I use that term quite loosely. I think I've got a very high survival instinct. I can't wallow in how I'm feeling, especially if it's like negative for too long. I know that the world sort of does not owe me, so I'm not. I don't feel entitled, and I think that that's sort of a good way that's a way that I approach life. The fact that should anything happen, feel it, but don't stay in it too long because the world is still moving. And that's just how I approach life. I think when you're surrounded also by poverty, right, and but you go to bed every day with a good meal. They try to take you to good schools. So I think there's also like a self-sacrifice that I saw from my mother that I'll always appreciate. And so that's also made me, I suppose, and I suppose also my aunts and my grandmother, watching them in terms of how they raised us and all the sacrifices that included, that sort of forced me to not take anything for granted. Geez, so growing up, I remember being exposed to poetry. Well, first of all, I loved reading, but specifically I loved African literature. So so that inspired my love for writing, for storytelling. So when I was in school, I started doing a lot of like poetry and like going to like art centers and taking part in the like poetry sessions and all of those sorts of things. So me and my friends, so I had two other friends who loved art as well, went to school together, and then at some point we were part of this other thing that we had at school, which was called Power and the Voice, which was, I think, sponsored or founded by the British Council. And it had to do with all sorts of modes of expression, whether it's storytelling, poetry, dancing, acting, all of those. So then we became part of it. I started to write more, and so when I finished school, I'd assumed that I'd write. So I thought that writing meant being a journalist. So I then applied to study journalism, and I was not accepted because actually my writing was more like creative writing. So I think that's basically how I ended up on this journey of visual arts or photography. Because I was not accepted into journalism school. When I started, I think my mom was very supportive. So my mom is late, right? So when I was in high school and going to all of these things, traveling for like performances, for poetry, whatever, going to theaters, she was always there. So so I don't think that when I said to her that I'm no longer going to be doing photojournalism, I'm going to actually continue with photography, or that I'm no longer going to be doing journalism, that she was surprised, but she was like supportive, I think, of whatever route I would have ended up taking. So, I mean, it's just the sort of male side of the family that was not too keen, that thought I should be doing something more serious. But in terms of my mother, and I think that that's the opinion that mattered the most, there was no conflict, no issues. And so I think with all the sort of challenges that come with being a creative, and especially with being an independent creative, I think because of the support, it made it easier to just see it through. I mean, I think if you think about the history of photography, for example, think about it specifically to South Africa, think around, the person that started, for example, or the founder of the Market Photo Workshop, David Goldblatt, who was a photojournalist. Think about the photographers that were Abo Peter Makubane, that were taking photographs during the struggle days. And so all of that. So for me, art, and if I'm speaking specifically to photography, it's not separate from politics, right? Because in terms of, especially I think when you think around things like documentary photography or photojournalism, that had a large influence also in terms of the country getting its freedom. So the images that came out around, even when you think around musicians like Miriam Makeba, some of the musicians that were banned from the country and their music was banned, all of that has a large part to do with politics. So in as much as our sort of contemporary art and practices aren't speaking, I think, aren't like evidencing, I suppose, the injustices of now, but a large part of our practices still are in different ways. So when we speak around identity, or when our practices speak to identity, and there's conversations, I think, through our work that are speaking around land, and a lot of the sort of traces of apartheid. There's no way that that's not linked to politics. So our role, I think, as artists will always be to depict the sort of politics of the now. And I think that whether that is direct or indirect, I think through your practice, whether that's also through certain sort of symbolisms or metaphors in the work, but your practice or your expression is definitely not separate from politics. So at the moment, I think also thinking around the fact that there's a pandemic happening, right? There's obviously been a lot of changes personally, professionally, financially, in every sort of aspect of our lives. And so for me, I think one of the things that has happened with the pandemic is that I've not traveled, right? And which is something that something that sort of informs my practice as well. So not having traveled for about a year or more has forced me to sort of be in the studio full time. And that's been interesting in terms of creation. So I've been in a sort of creative bubble for the last few months, which is extremely awesome. Because I can't remember the last time I was able to work on 3-4, bodies of work in one go and really be inspired and really be involved, I think, in every aspect of it. So it's been great in that sense, right? And I suppose perhaps it's also quite heightened by, or it's also because of the anxiety, I think, that also comes with right now. So I would imagine that let me not speak for other artists, but it's also very much about what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and all of those things. And I think because of just how we are all in ourselves at the moment without having to really interact, I think, with a lot of people, not being able to travel. It's actually created a space, I think, for me to be more introspective. And so the works that are coming out, I think, over the next few months are very exciting for me. I think I've been able to tap into ideas and things that I've been thinking about for quite some time, and spend time to actually allow the work to speak back to me and tell me what it's trying to become. And so the work that, when you walked in, that we're working on, that's a new work, it's a new medium, and I don't know the sort of end result of it, but I'm excited about it. I mean, I think for me, it's also the recognition that you also need to say it's valid, right? So I mean, there have been many awards that where you are like the finalist, you're like the last two people remaining, and you're so sure and you don't get it, right? And it's also, I think, when you have said that the work that you do is valid to yourself, that won't stop your practice, because I think it's I think that there are things that are meant for you and the things that are not meant for you. And there are things that were meant to be yours, but it's circumstances, you know. So I think if you always need an award to validate, it might be a long way for you, I think. And it might be very difficult for you to enjoy your practice. So I mean, with the sort of awards I've received, which I'm really grateful for, I think more than anything, with awards that also enable creation or for production, those are always exciting for me, because it creates a situation where I'm able to have the sort of support from an institution, in terms of their backing, in terms of just how they guide me with the process, but also financial support from the institution. So that makes a huge difference in terms of your sort of creative process, because you are able to create what you have envisioned without the sort of financial pressures. So for me, in terms of creation awards, those are always exciting. I think that outside of the sort of recognition that it comes with, but things that are always enabling me for my practice to move to the sort of next level that I envision for it is always great. I mean, I think it's such a difficult question, because last year I would have said, and I think for the most part I was speaking around how my practice is trying to look at healing. And I don't know if it's that right now. So I don't know what I can say people are supposed to take away from my practice. Because I think also it's the reality that when I create, it's not really about my audience, right? So it's a work that's sort of burning to come to life. And so I can't really say. I can say what the themes around my works are, but I can't say what people are supposed to take away from it. And I think I think there was a conversation that I was listening to with other artists or other thinkers, and they were speaking around how we almost expect certain works, especially certain works that come from a painful place or come from a very personal stance, to heal you as the person that's creating, or to heal the person that's receiving the work. But I don't think that it's also realistic to have that sort of assumption. I think if anything, it can become a space for reflection. But it also might not, because maybe the work might not resonate with you on an emotional level. Geez, there's quite a bit and a lot that I'm excited about, and I don't say this often. No, I don't say this often because I'm not often really in a state where I've been in like a creative bubble for like as long as I have, I think, for right now. So we've got 2 animations that are currently in development, which one is really exciting. One is a commission which will be exhibited at the Georgian House in Bristol, the UK. And it's a commission by the Bristol Council, and I featured Tandin Duli, so she created the sound for the animation, and it's beautiful. And we worked with 2 animators locally. I think it's BBS Studios, I brought Tat on board as a project manager, who was fantastic. She's an independent curator. So I'm looking forward to that animation being finalized and it being launched. It should be around August, September in Bristol. And then we've got another one in development, which is based on a previous body of work, which is around theatre. If I'm not mistaken, yes, it's around theatre. So it's around a play by Ethel Fugard. So there's that animation that's also being developed, which is looking amazing. And there's the new works, which when you walked in, we're busy with. And then there is likely to be this new work that I've been thinking about for quite some time, which I got the award for, which will be these cardboard cutouts that would ideally become a life-size cardboard cutout pop-up book. So yeah, so it's an exciting time, I think, because all the works are so different. Yeah, so I'm excited. So Kile Falaka I'll always define as my most honest work. And I think every artist sort of has that work that is like the raw work, you know. Like, you know, like I think I'll always think about, for example, I don't know if she would agree. Like Sade, you know, Sweet as Taboo is like, it's just that, you know, that song. Yeah. So, you know, Kile Falaka, I think it's that it comes from a really honest place. It comes from a vulnerable place. And I think it also does not rely, I think, so much on like academics, on conceptualizing. I think that work just wanted to be birthed through me. And that's why I feel like it's really one of my most honest works. And I think that there's, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people have also recognized it from that stance, that it's a work that, you know, that where you are, you know, really out there about what's going on in your life, about your pain, and you don't have to be. So this is Black to Fairy Tales, and it's works, one of my earliest works. So this is from 2010, and this work I was basically thinking around, I mean, it then goes back to the sort of initial conversation around me growing up in Lebohang. So I was looking at growing up as a child without any African literature, and all this access to Western fairy tales, and, you know, and also, you know, going to like a multiracial school where where you guys are basically acting out these fairy tales or these Western fairy tales. So with our sort of annual plays at school, you'd audition to be, you know, whatever, to be Cinderella, Snow White, you name them. And me and my friends, we never ever got to play the lead role. So we'd always be like a sunflower, a butterfly, you know, those sort of things. And so, you know, and so the work, you know, is basically speaking, I think, to literature, or to, you know, playing the lead role, I think, in literature. So I then reimagined these fairy tales as the sort of lead character in them. And, you know, and I also then reimagine them in a language that's familiar to me, in settings that are familiar to me. So I think that also this, for me, is a conversation also about these two worlds, you know, being from Katlehong and, you know, having to identify, and this is also the power of stories, having to identify with these characters that I couldn't identify with. And how far that was from my reality. I mean, I think if you understand how the power of stories, in terms of how we think about ourselves and how we visualize ourselves, then I think that question that answer is a given. You know, as I was saying, that for me as a child, growing up, and, you know, all the sort of, or most of the books in our library are like these Western fairy tales, or having to then act them out and prepare for them and read the lines, or not ever have to be able or be in a position to play those sort of lead roles. I think then you understand the sort of power that has when you think about your own childhood, and the sort of influence that it has on you when you think about, you know, obviously playing Snow White with her long hair, her light skin, or her, you know, pale skin, big blue eyes, all of those sorts of things, and that's what you're supposed to identify with. So I think that for me, that is an answer that you need to decide for yourself. You know, what do you want to see? What do you want to identify with? Because also the point of, you know, TV and, you know, and stories and all of those things is about us sort of reflecting back. So it's also when you think around a TV and the screen and that sort of mirror image, it is very much about you almost looking back and you placing yourself in that position.